This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi, Talia.
Hey, Tanya.
I have a new episode today.
Yay.
Yay. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Before I get into the story, I'm going to ask everyone to hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever app you're listening to, and let's just do this.
I would love it. This was recommended by one of our patrons, right?
Yes, thank you, Talia.
You're welcome.
It was recommended by Erin M.
Erin M.
Thank you, Erin.
She knows who she is.
She knows who she is. On Saturday, April 28th, 1978, 23-year-old Terry Lee Chasteen was driving her 3 children to the babysitter. Her children were 5-year-old Misty, 4-year-old Mark, and 2-year-old Stephen. And Terry was a single mom, so she needed the extra help so she could go to work that morning. Terry worked at Marsh Grocery Store, where she worked in the produce department, while she was driving along Interstate 465, and that's in Indiana.
Okay.
There was a driver of a construction truck who was motioning to her and her vehicle, like, pull over, like something's wrong with your car. Terry pulled over to the side of the highway, and the truck parked behind her. The driver was Stephen Judy, and he told Terry that it looked like one of her rear tires was loose on her car, and he offered to fix it for her. Terry opened the trunk of her car, and she got out a lug wrench for him, and she gave it to him. He tightened her tire, and they both got into their vehicles to drive away. But before either of them left, Terry got back out of her car, and she told Stephen it seemed like something else was wrong, like with her emergency brake, and she asked if he could take a look. Stephen opened the hood of her car, and instead of fixing anything, he removed a coiled wire from the engine so it wouldn't start. When Terry got back into the car and tried to start the car, obviously the engine wouldn't turn over. She again got out of her car and asked Steve for help. He offered to take her and the kids to get help, like, let's go so you can make a phone call or whatever you need to do.
I'm sure she's thinking, I've got my kids here.
Yeah, I'm perfectly fine.
Yeah, nothing's going to happen.
Right, exactly. I mean, I would think that.
Right.
But no one ever saw Terry or her 3 children alive ever again.
Or her 3 children.
Terry's body was found at approximately 9:30 a.m. in White Lick Creek, which is in Morgan County, Indiana. A police search of the creek led to the discovery of 3 other bodies, Terry's children. Terry was found naked, with her hands and feet bound with strips of material that were torn from her clothing, and her head was covered with the pants she was wearing that day. She had been gagged and strangled with other strips of cloth. She had also been raped, and her cause of death was by strangulation. Her children died of drowning.
Oh my God.
I know.
This woman and what she had to have gone through.
Can you imagine?
Nope.
The terror.
Oh,
and the kids.
Oh my God. Not the kids, man.
I mean, a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and the 2-year-old, Stephen, he was almost 3. These are little.
It's one thing to go through that terror alone. It's another thing, another level when your children are there.
Right?
Oh, Lord.
I don't even want to think about it.
Let's move on.
Evidence was eventually found that linked Steve to these crimes. They found semen on a coat that Terry had been wearing. 2 threads of material were found in Stephen's truck that matched threads of one article of Terry's clothing. And the evidence further established that Terry had left her house with her 3 kids sometime after 6 a.m. As I told you, she was driving to the babysitter. And when the probable driving route was retraced, her car was found parked along the interchange of Interstate 465 and 70 in southwest Marion County. Several witnesses told the police that they had seen various segments of what had happened. On the day of the killings and the preceding day, Steve had in his control a red and gray truck, and that's the truck that I mentioned, but it belonged to someone else. Several witnesses placed that truck near Terry's car, And one witness said that he saw a blonde-haired man, who he later identified as Steve, standing near a car parked on the interstate with the hood open. Another witness said he was driving on this one state road and he saw this red and gray truck, and in the truck was a man, a woman, and some kids. He said the truck was just moving like at a really fast pace and kind of erratic, and that the woman in the truck waved to him when they were stopped at a traffic light.
Oh, man.
I know. That truck was seen parked near the scene of the killings by White Lick Creek around 7 to 7:30 a.m.
This was about an hour after she left.
Yeah. Another witness said that they saw a man near the scene carrying a child under one arm and also carrying a bundle, which had the shape of a child, or a child-sized bundle, under his other arm. And a third child was walking in front of him. There was no adult besides the man that was seen by the witness. And then around 7:30, a witness saw a man running from the creek toward the parked truck with no one else in tow. The day of the killing, Steve returned that truck to the man who it belonged to. His name was Robert, between 8 and 9 that morning. He initially, of course, Steve initially denied any involvement in the incident, and he said he was with his girlfriend at the time. And, I just don't remember what else happened that morning. But his girlfriend, while she first corroborated his story, she did eventually come forward and say he wasn't with me that morning. So Steve was arrested and he went on trial. And during his trial, he presented an insanity defense.
Okay.
And he testified at length concerning his commission of the rape and murders. He said he was driving along Interstate 465 when he passed Terry's car. He motioned for her to pull over to the shoulder of the road, indicating something was wrong with her car. And like I said, they pulled to the shoulder. He pretended to assist them, removed that coil wire, and then when her car wouldn't start, he offered them a ride.
So he admitted all that?
Yes. Steve then drove the victims to the location of the killings and pulled his truck off the road. He said he directed them on foot toward the creek, and he sent the children down the path ahead of Terry and him. So it's him, Terry, and the kids in front of her.
And what are these kids and Terry thinking as they're being directed down this path?
I can only imagine, right?
Right.
He said he then raped Terry and bound her hands and feet and gagged her. When Terry cried out, the children ran back up the path to them. So I'm thinking maybe the kids were out of eyesight when he did this, so they ran back. Steve said that the children then stood around him and yelled at him. And at that point, he strangled Terry and threw her body into the creek in front of the kids.
Oh.
He then said he threw each of the children as far as he could into the water. He remembered seeing one of the children standing in the creek. He went back to his truck after trying to erase his footprints in the dirt and then drove away. Afterward, he stopped and bought a soft drink and threw the coil wire away. Then he returned the truck to Robert.
See, that just doesn't seem to make sense to me, like that Terry would voluntarily walk down there and then he would bind her and do all that. But maybe he was threatening the children if she didn't.
Maybe. Yeah, he really didn't go into further detail of what exactly happened. But that's the way he says it happened.
Okay.
And we know people
I'm sure
lie.
he's a very honest killer.
Yeah, I'm sure, he made himself look in the best light possible.
Can always trust fucking killers.
Right. And if one of the kids was standing in the creek, then...
Like, why would he leave?
And why would they drown? I don't know. I don't know how deep the creek is. I guess I don't know that part.
But I wouldn't leave a kid standing in a creek.
No, right?
All right. He's a liar.
He's a liar.
Let's go.
Like you said, his story did have some discrepancies, but the court felt like it was just minor. So his testimony pretty much corroborated the evidence presented by the prosecutor. Mushroom hunters were actually the first people to find Terry and her children's bodies at White Lake Creek, and they were the ones that called the police. When the officers arrived, they were so affected by what they found that not only the mushroom hunters, but a lot of people in the sheriff's office really hoped Steve was going to get the death penalty in this case. So apparently it was bad.
mean, yeah, you're seeing 3 dead children and their mother.
Right? Horrific. The only defense presented at the trial that I mentioned was this plea of insanity, saying, he was insane at the time of the commission of the offenses. There was a doctor, Dr. Kathy Whittam, She was a psychologist. She testified for the defense that she believed Steve had chronic emotional problems.
Well, who doesn't?
Right. I know.
Well,
I love it.
I must be insane.
I know. We all have chronic emotional problems, probably.
Jeez, that's the worst defense ever.
She said Steve had antisocial personality disorder, and she had the opinion that he was legally insane.
Based on what?
She based it on the fact that Steve had this extensive record, like his life and his mental condition, and these records covered a period of 14 years. And I'm going to tell you about it now. So during this time, he had been examined and evaluated many times as a result of committing offenses at school and in his neighborhood. And I'll tell you, at the time of the crime, he's only about 21 or 22.
Oh, he's young.
Right. When Steve was 13 years old, he pretended to be a Boy Scout and forced his way into a woman's home in Indianapolis.
At 13?
At 13. He raped her, then stabbed her with a pocket knife until the blade broke, a total of 18 times, and also hit her in the head with a hatchet.
What?
Right at 13.
That's not a good sign.
No. The hatchet fractured her skull and cut off one of her fingers on her left hand when she tried to protect herself from the hatchet. And the woman survived. He was arrested for this crime, and he spent 6 months in juvie. Then he was admitted to Central State Hospital in Indianapolis for evaluation. Doctors at the hospital diagnosed Steve as a sexual psychopath, and he remained at the hospital for 3 years until January 1973, and he was 16 at this point. He was released into the custody of his foster parents, Bob and Mary Carr. After Steve was arrested, the Carrs claimed they were not told of Steve's violent past.
Yeah, I was going to say, wow, they must be saints to take him in.
Exactly, and they were really upset because they did have other children. A week before he killed Terry and her children, the Carrs did bail him out of jail after he was arrested for armed robbery. Part of me feels like they were enablers, maybe a little bit. I don't know. They didn't turn their back on him. So
maybe they were just hoping they could change him.
Maybe. During his trial, Steve testified that he had been committing various offenses since he was 10 years old. He said he'd been involved in approximately 200 shoplifting incidents, probably about the same number of burglaries, 20 to 50 robberies, approximately 24 car thefts, and from 12 to 16 rapes.
How's that helping his case?
I know.
For insanity. Just making me hate him more.
Just making you're just a criminal dirtbag.
Yeah.
There's no hope for rehabilitation here.
No.
During those periods, he testified, he said he had lived with or had intercourse with 15 women. 3 women with whom Steve had lived with testified and said he never threatened them or physically harmed them while he was with them. In fact, he was living with one of those women during the week prior to killing Terry and her kids.
Is that his girlfriend?
Mm-hmm. However, other women testified saying Steve had attacked them, and he would attack them while they were in their car. So he probably came up to them while they were at a store or something. He'd kidnap them, threaten them, beat them. One witness testified to being a victim of one of his armed robberies. And all of these witnesses said they believed he was in control of himself during the incidents, and he could have stopped what he was doing. He didn't appear to be insane or out of his mind or anything like that. However, one witness did say at one point that Steve, quote, acted crazy, end quote, when he was beating her about the face.
Well, I mean, he's beating her about the face.
Right.
I would expect him to seem
crazy.
A little crazy.
Yeah. Previously conducted psychiatric evaluations classified Steve as having a personality disorder and concluded there was no indication of mental illness.
Thank you.
So there were 2 court-appointed psychiatrists who did evaluations on Steve. And after examining him, in their opinions, they said he had antisocial personality disorder.
Which means he's an asshole.
And they said he was legally sane at the time he committed the crimes. In fact, every psychiatrist who had ever examined Steve had been of the opinion that he was of normal or above average intelligence and legally sane. So the jury rejected Steve's insanity defense, and they convicted him on all the charges. He was charged with murder, obviously. So after they found him guilty on all 4 counts of murder, the sentencing portion of the trial was conducted. Steve ordered his attorneys not to present any evidence of mitigating factors or circumstances to the jury to help his case.
I mean, I'm just trying to think of what there might even possibly be.
I mean, he had foster parents, so he wasn't with his own parents. So maybe
Oh,
there
I
was something,
guess.
right? Childhood trauma.
Maybe he brought flowers to an old lady one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Right. Like, what could it possibly be if he's saying he was 10 when he started committing like robberies and shoplifting?
Yeah.
And Steve stated to the jury in open court at the sentencing hearing that he would advise them to give him the death sentence because he had no doubt he would kill again if he had the opportunity. And he said some of the people he might kill in the future might be members of the jury.
oh, fuck.
Right? Right?
Oh, fuck.
So the jury foreman, his name was John Sappington. He was a retired postal clerk. He remembers that day. The jury took the vote for sentencing. During the hearing, Steve looked at John and said to him, quote, "I know where you live and I know you have a daughter," end quote.
Oh.
I know. John said he threatened every member of the jury and he threatened the judge, saying if he didn't get the death penalty, they were all in danger of him getting to them. John says, so jury goes into deliberation. So we're going to decide, what is Steve's sentence going to be?
Well,
There
let me
was-
think about
I know.
that for a second.
There was 9 men and 3 women, and they get into the jury room. John asked them initially, so do we want to talk about what's going on or do we want to just take a vote? So everybody decides, they want to take a vote right away.
I'd like to take a vote right now.
I know. Let's do it immediately. So they take this vote and they're unanimous that they're going to sentence Steve to death. John said after they took this vote in favor of the death penalty, he said, maybe we should sit here for a few minutes so it wouldn't look too bad, that we were so quick about his sentence. So they all had some coffee before they called the bailiff. After the trial was over, John was reflective about his service as the foreman in this jury, and he said, quote, "I never go across that bridge, the one that's at White Lick Creek, without thinking of those people he killed." And he lived just a few miles away from there. He also said, "I never lost one night's sleep over our decision. We had no choice." And it's interesting to note that John is Catholic, and his faith opposes capital punishment. He said, "I've had to cope with that, reconcile that decision." He said, quote, "I'm a man of conscience, and I thought it might bother me, but it has not."
Well, that's what Steve wanted anyway.
Yeah. And he said, if anyone against the death penalty had seen and heard what I did, they might reconsider. And then he ended that with saying, the world is better off. End
Yeah, I'm
quote.
going to have to agree on that.
Right. During the final argument in his sentencing hearing, Steve ordered his attorneys not to argue against the death penalty. So they complied with his request, except for a suggestion to the trial judge about the constitutionality of the death penalty, saying, you might want to reconsider that before we actually impose this. On October 27th, Steve appeared in court with his attorneys because he was having a hearing, and it was his request to waive any appeals in the future. At that hearing, Steve very freely and openly discussed his situation with the court. It was all obvious to the members of the court that Steve understood what was happening, that he understood what could be expected if they accepted his waiver. He expressed his understanding about everything the trial court said to him, like that he had a right to counsel if he was granted a new trial, and, his sentence might change if he got a new trial, and that waiving his rights would be considered a final decision, and that would be it. Finally, he freely admitted that he was guilty of the murders from which he was convicted. Steve further stated that he felt his attorneys that were in court with him, that they were, quote unquote, darn good attorneys. He said he had no complaint about them. In fact, they were the best lawyers he had ever seen. I'm sure he's run into a few lawyers
Yeah.
in the
Guessing.
system. He said he wanted it to be known that his actions didn't detract in any way from his feeling that they were representing him competently and they treated him fairly. He made it clear that he didn't want his lawyers to make any arguments for him regarding the death sentence. Before the hearing terminated, Steve stated he would like to formally fire his attorneys, saying he no longer wished for them to represent him. He said he had nothing against them. Again, they were great attorneys, but he wanted the sentence review to proceed with no further efforts.
He just wants to die.
He just wants to die.
I got that point, Steve.
Thank you. So the court acknowledged him dismissing his attorneys, and they released him. A few interesting notes about the actual prosecutor on this case. His name was Tom Gray. When Steve's case went to trial, Tom was in his first term as Morgan County prosecutor. He was among the first people to show up at the crime scene and says he'll never forget the eerie mist that was present that day. When Terry's body was first found, and her body was found with Misty's, and the police continued to search, he could hear them say, "We found 2 more."
Oh, man.
I know. And he says that if he had ever written a book about the case, that was going to be the title for it.
We found 2 more?
We found 2 more. He says he wasn't necessarily pro-death penalty, but in Morgan County, that was what needed to be done in Steve's case. One of his interns' name was Steve Oliver, who I'm going to call Oliver. He said the first dead body he ever saw was that of Terry and her children. At the time, he had just passed the bar exam, and instead of celebrating, he spent that week at the morgue.
Wow.
Yeah. About Steve, Oliver said, quote, "He was a true sociopath with absolutely no conscience or remorse or guilt. It made me really want to see that man was killed." End quote.
I can't believe that he did it with a woman who had kids in her car.
I know, right?
Like, that is fucked up.
I know. I think about, like, what was he thinking that day? She just drive by and he was like, "Oh, I think I'm going to rape and kill her." Right?
Yeah, I guess.
I guess. Before I tell you more, we're going to take a break. So I left off by telling you about Prosecutor Oliver, the intern. He said he was so in favor of seeing Steve die that he carried a handgun to all the depositions that were done in the case, hoping that Steve would make some move, like try to escape so that he could shoot him himself.
Wow.
Over time, though, Oliver says he has come to oppose capital punishment. He said even though he has this image burned into his mind of these 3 little children laying on that morgue table, he said, I just can't believe in the capital punishment any longer. Steve's defense attorney, Steve Harris, was only 34 when
How many Steves are there in this story?
I know, there's so many Steves, so I'm going to call him Harris. When this case ended up with him, he said he spent a shit ton of time with Steve. They spent,
lucky guy.
day in and day out preparing for this trial.
Oh, my God.
And he was court appointed, by the way. Like, what a fucking nightmare, right?
Oh, yeah.
He remembers Steve as being personable, polite, considerate, cooperative, but also, he said, a calculated killer. He said, "It was a strange situation for me to be there with this guy who seemed so normal, so sociable on the surface, who is capable of such horrible things." And he does believe that if Steve had gotten out, he would kill again.
Oh, I do too. I think Steve made that clear.
Mm-hmm. And no, so it was kind of an anomaly, Harris said. You know, he seemed charming and personable, like people liked him, his foster parents supported him, and yet he was just capable of this evil.
Like Ted Bundy.
Yeah, right? Like Ted Bundy, of course. Yeah, that's a good example. Said it was really just very scary for him to know that there's people like him out there.
And he's got to sit there and talk to him and
Yeah.
chit-chat and say, "Hey, do you want to get some lunch?"
Right. Right? I could not be a criminal defense attorney.
No,
God bless
divorces are hard enough.
Yes, God bless criminal defense attorneys, because while I believe everyone deserves a fair trial and a defense,
That's why I never got into crim, man.
Yeah,
I can't. No.
I don't think I could.
No,
It
I
would
can't
be so
represent
hard.
rat bastards.
Right? Like, I don't think my belief in defending the Constitution is strong enough to get over that.
Right.
He said that Steve wanted to stir up some shit at the sentencing hearing. He had told Harris that he was going to jump over the table and choke Tom Gray, who was the prosecutor. And Harris is telling him, no, don't do that, because somebody might shoot you. And it might even be me that might shoot you. Then Steve asked his lawyer, "Can I address the jurors?" And Harris said, "Sure, but keep it clean." And he didn't know he was going to threaten them.
That's
all,
when he
right?
threatened to kill him.
He says, "Oh shit."
Jesus.
He was like, "Oh man."
And I thought we had bad clients.
I know.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine?
Nope.
You're like, "Oh yeah, if you want to say something to the jury, go right ahead.
I'm going to kill you all.
I'm going to kill you all. You better not let me out. I know where you live. I know you have a child."
This is crazy.
Like, how fucking terrifying. Since there was no lengthy appeals process to go through, Steve's execution date came quickly. It was less than 2 years from when he committed this crime.
Wow.
Harris vowed to be there with him, though, until the end. So he said one of the last things that Steve ever said to him was, quote, "This is the best thing," end quote. Harris said, and even though he knew it was probably the right thing to do, it was still difficult to go through the execution of someone.
Oh, I'm sure.
He felt obligated to stay and witness the execution and be there with Steve.
Mm.
About a half an hour before the execution was scheduled, Steve was joking around with him and said, oh, if you ever have another client who wants the death penalty, tell them not to do it. Like, ha, 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 ha. And he was like chain smoking, cigarettes.
That
and he
is awkward as fuck.
I know. And Steve said to him, I'm going to quit soon. I'm going to quit smoking soon.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. At the end, Steve was offered an injection of Valium, which Harris urged him not to take because he said, you want to think clearly. I don't know why you would want to think clearly.
I don't want to think clearly.
Steve said, no, I want to take the Valium. So he got the injection, and soon after, he relaxed, and the two men said goodbye. They shook hands, and Steve said, thanks, this really is the right thing. Don't feel bad about it. And then Harris left and took his seat in the viewing room. The next time he saw Steve, he was being led to the electric chair with a black cloth covering his face. He was only about 15 feet away. That's pretty close.
Yeah.
Behind a glass panel, 4 guards stood on each side. They strapped Steve into the electric chair and attached a metal saucer to his head and electrodes to one leg. A few minutes after 1 a.m., the warden spoke the words, "Commence the execution." And that was it. One of the last things Steve did was to give Harris an envelope and told him not to open it until after the execution. Harris figured it was probably a confession of other crimes Steve had committed because he had told Harris he had killed other people.
Really?
Yeah. So inside the envelope were several pages of paper, and written on the first page was, quote, "I'm sorry, Steve, but I've decided to handle it this way because I care too much for my foster mom and family. I hope you can understand. Thank you for all you've done for me." End quote. And then he signed his name. The remaining pages were blank.
Oh,
and Harris
man.
said, "That little son of a bitch."
Oh.
Yeah.
Are there any unsolved murders in
There's probably some unsolved
Monroe and
murders. I
Marion
know.
County?
Harris said Steve's was the first and last capital punishment case he ever did.
I want to know who else he killed.
I know. And he said he's never going to do another death penalty case.
Oh, hell no.
So Stephen died in the electric chair on March 9th, 1981. He was 24 years old. Because we are so interested in it, his final meal,
Yep, gotta know that.
it was a pretty good one. It was prime rib,
Ooh.
lobster,
Wow.
baked potatoes, salad, and dinner rolls. He requested a beer with his last meal, but that was denied.
Oh, fuck.
So he had to drink water, probably. I don't know.
Gotta ask for a case of beer.
I know. A few
Vodka.
shots of vodka or something. His last words were, quote, "I don't hold no grudges. This is my doing. I'm sorry it happened," end quote. So his foster father, Robert Carr, and Stephen Harris were the only 2 witnesses at the execution, other than, obviously, the people from the Department of Corrections in Indiana. His father said Steve made a phone call to a girl in Texas that he had been serious about a few years prior, and his dad said of the phone call, quote, "I don't know why, it just came out of the dark. He hadn't talked to her in about 5 or 6 years. They finally located her and got her on the phone. Her name is Jeannie. I don't know her last name. I think she probably was the only girl he ever loved," end quote.
Can you imagine getting that call? You're Jeannie.
I know.
Hey, Jeannie, what's up?
Right?
I'm just getting ready to...
Getting ready to get strapped into that electric chair.
Just wanted to say
Yeah.
hi.
Say hi, what's new with you? Right?
What the fuck is that?
How you been all these years? I've been doing pretty shitty. I've been doing some awful shit to people. I mean, right? Poor Jeannie. On his last day on death row, Steve got about 20 telegrams, all of them for people urging him to change his mind and ask for a stay of execution. But Steve remained adamant until the end that he would rather die in the electric chair than spend decades in prison. I mean, I kind of get that, right? I kind of do.
Yeah. Prison. Yeah.
Prison has to suck ass. I mean,
Yeah.
I've never personally been.
I'm just guessing.
I'm just guessing it's got to be awful. Before he died, he told his foster mother that he left, quote, "a string of bodies," end quote, across 5 states, Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Illinois, and Indiana, saying he raped and killed more women than he could count. But he never told her any names of his victims.
Why didn't he just put it on the letter then? I thought he was
know.
trying to spare her feelings.
I
So
know.
why didn't he just... If he already told her that,
Yeah, he told her that, I know, before he died.
then put it in the letter so we know.
I know.
What the hell's wrong with him?
And she didn't tell the police what he said until about 2 weeks after Steve was dead. and buried. She said, I just wanted everything to settle down before I went to the police. So I'm
Yeah.
sure there's got to be some unsolved cases because, like I said, did he just wake up that morning and be like, oh, I'm going to kill somebody? I guess maybe.
Well, not if he says he did others.
Yeah.
He did others.
I'm sure it started with rapes because he did admit.
And then it escalated.
I would imagine.
He's a horrible asshole.
Right? And he was so young to have done all these horrible things. I don't know. I'm always shocked. I don't know why. We've been doing this podcast now for 3 years. I don't know why I'm shocked by anything.
I know. This is the kids. And this one is the kids.
It's the kids. Yes. Yeah, that part was just horrendous. I can't even. It's people who kill kids are the fucking worst.
Yeah.
To me, they're the scum of the earth.
Yep.
Anyway, now I'm going to get off my soapbox. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you guys for listening.
And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe/follow button. And Talia, we have some shout outs.
Shout outs.
I would like to remind everyone, if you are an Apple subscriber and would like a shout out, Apple does not tell us your name like Patreon does.
Right.
So if you'd like a shout out, please email us. And our email address is contact@crimesandconsequences.com. And I think people have been getting that message because we got contacted by a lot of Apple people recently.
Sweet.
And they are Ruby N, Tammy W, Jill R, Kaylin P, and I'm going to give a special shout out to her sister Nikita because Nikita's the one that turned Kaylin onto us. So
Thank you, Nikita.
thank you, ladies. Megan S, Alyssa D, and Kelly G. Thank you, dear Apple subscribers.
You guys are amazing.
And now our Patreons. Beverly S, Kayla C, Terry S, Candace M, Mina F, Danielle R, Aya H, Melissa L, Raven R, Jack, Leanne G, Amy G, Chrisanne J, Jessica, Taryn W, Angela H, Danielle K, Jenny O, and last but not least, Doug H.
Doug H.
Doug H. Thank you all so much for becoming
members of our Patreon.
Yes, and you get exclusive episodes that we have not released to the public.
Lots and lots and lots of them. And then early releases of this episode that's ad-free.
Ad-free. So if you're interested in learning more about how to become a Patreon, go to patreon.com/TNTcrimes and you'll see our membership levels.
Or you can go to our website, crimesandconsequences.com.
That's another place to check it out.
It's an amazing place to check it out.
And if you just love your Apple Podcast app, you can become a subscriber there by just clicking a little button and put your fingerprint in, done. Get the automatic
Face ID,
exactly,
whatever.
All of that great stuff. So you can also find us on social media.
That's right.
Facebook and Instagram at Hardcore True Crime.
Hardcore True Crime.
And is there anything else?
Oh, I think that's it.
You can find photos from this episode too on our website.
Perfect.
All right. Until our next episode.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.